Welcome back to the What's Your One More podcast. Today, I'm joined with not only a good friend, but an expert in what I consider to be in what we call Senate Bill 4D, Justin Cerrato, attorney. You've been in the business for 12 years now in the real estate game doing this. Thank you for being on the show. You're joining us with Blue Ocean Title today. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, great to be here, Quinn, and thanks for having me. And I think these podcasts are just vital to the longevity of our agents here in the market. Just educating them on every last detail that we possibly can just to keep these transactions in good standing. So happy to do it and glad to be here.
Yeah, man, it's glad to have you. Thanks for saying all of that kind words, man. We're super excited. This is going to be our 58th episode. Super stoked about it. And, you know, this is something that I've noticed you've been going around the region doing this right now, talking about this new proposal, nicknamed the Surfside Bill, kind of after the condos that collapsed down there in Miami. And I think there's a lot of people that are maybe potential condo buyers and even condo owners right now that just aren't aware of what's taking place. I'm not saying this was passed under the radar, but I'm saying this didn't make the front page of the newspapers. And this definitely isn't on the front page of a lot of news outlets that I'm watching. As a matter of fact, I didn't even hear about it until you spoke about it at a meeting I was at. So I was glad to get you on the show today and talk a little bit about it. So to kind of kick it off, explain, what am I even talking about? Senate Bill 4D. What is that?
Yeah, that's right, Quentin. I mean, it has been somewhat under the radar, and until some recent updates to our local contract here specifically, it really has not been a part of the conversation with condo buyers in particular. So this Surfside Bill, again, Senate Bill 4D, was established to require a statewide inspection program for condos and cooperatives, specifically 3 stories and more. And we'll touch more on some of these requirements and these thresholds throughout the cast here. But it's really a 2-prong inspection. It's A, the structural integrity of the building, and B, a reserve study to make sure that these condos and cooperatives are safe for continued use.
So for our audience, break down, what is a reserve study? Like, that's a big term. A lot of people don't know what that, if you're not in the business, you might not know what that means. Kind of break that down for them real quick.
Yeah, sure. So it's simply a study of the reserves that the association is holding so far as funds to fund deferred maintenance projects.
Okay. So if you're a condo association, you not only have regular dues, but inside those dues, there's a portion of that goes towards a reserve fund.
Correct.
And so what they're saying is, hey, listen, we got to do a study of that fund to make sure we have enough in case there is something catastrophic that happens, or potential what happened in Miami. Do we have enough to cover that? And this is the reserve study that you're referring to?
Correct. And even more so, just your everyday maintenance and deferred maintenance. So, certain elements of that building have a certain shelf life, i.e. the roof. So rather than an association just kind of, for lack of better terms, kick the can down the road and not fund those reserves over a certain amount of time previous to when that maintenance project needs to occur, and rather just establish a one-time assessment when the need comes about, which obviously, can be a detriment to many owners.
Yeah. It's a strain, financial strain.
Absolutely.
So what he's talking about here, guys, is just think about this. Like, and say, hey, I'm going to prepay for something over time that I know is going to happen. I've got to put a new roof on. Let's use that as an example. There might be some structural damage or structural issues that need to take place. Instead of waiting for that to happen and saying, hey, we're going to assess $25,000 across the board, we're actually going to maintain and put this in over a monthly period, a yearly period, to kind of have that already sitting there waiting to where it's not such a financial burden.
Yeah, it's far more manageable for the owners. So that $25,000 roof project, if maybe it's a $2,000 assessment per year leading up for those 12 years.
And so now what's happening is they're going to and they're revising those studies, and they're saying, hey, listen, we're going to make sure, based on what we've seen happen already, that you have enough in there. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So walk us through the rest. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to break that down.
Yeah. So really this all originated with a task force that was established by the state of Florida. It was comprised of 8 attorneys. And they, after the collapse of that Surfside building in the Champlain complex down in Miami, they wanted to shorten the leash on self-governance of condos. And thus this bill was created and enacted in May of 2022. So like you said earlier, it's not new, but it is just kind of coming to light now.
Yeah. It's like I said, probably in the last 60 days, I started to hear about it. And I like to think I'm pretty dialed into the news here. So May 22 is a shock to me that's when it was passed and starting to go through. But some associations have already kind of jumped in and got ahead of this and started doing some reserve study. So what else is inside this bill that we may be missing? Is there talked about that 3-story, talk about proximity from the water, kind of walk us through what is every condo subject to this, or is it just a select few?
So no, so there's certain thresholds and there are certain exemptions, excuse me. So it starts at the 3rd level.
Okay.
So anything 3 stories and above is subject to this new regulation. And let me just kind of go back and give a quick history as far as condos being established in the state of Florida. So that was roughly about 60 years ago. And the concept of a condominium was established really to with the idea of providing more affordable home ownership as compared to single family.
Talk about that all the time on the show.
Yeah. So, and we'll come full circle with kind of some of the quandaries that will result from this bill. But it's 3 stories and higher. And again, the older condos, the more dated condos are going to be the ones subject to this first, or have the sooner, the most, the closest in time as far as a deadline.
So is there a certain amount of age on that?
Yeah. So really, the way the bill reads is if a CO was issued on or before July 1st of 1992, then that deadline to have this study completed will be December 31st of 2024.
Wow. That's right around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And from what I understand, these studies, they're not quick, and there's only so many people that can do them in the state.
Correct.
So there's our conundrum. So if this was built prior to 92, what you're saying is they have till December of 24 to get this done.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So I understand that. So what's the next step if there is there a certain age limit outside that 92 that is addressed?
So
next?
yeah, anything after that, then the way the bill reads is anything 30 years or older would have to be performed or completed. The study would have to be completed by the end of that year in which it turns 30.
Oh, wow. So if you got a condo that's 27 years old right now, by the time it turns 30 years old, that study has to be complete.
Correct. It turns 30, let's say, on January 1st. By December of that year, that study has to be completed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So I see a kind of conundrum brewing right there. There's not enough not enough people to go around and complete this study, if you may. And these studies, again, take time. They're not quick.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I mean, do you see that as well? That's what's going to happen there?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there might be a chance those get pushed out. But regardless, there's some that are 25 to 20 years old. They're saying, hey, listen, we see that potentially being a problem. We're going to go ahead and do this assessment now. We're going to go ahead and have this study done now and get our name in line to get it done. Are you seeing that happening?
Correct. Yeah. And some of these, it's just been standard operating procedure. I mean, they've had these studies done. However, there are some that have not. To kind of keep the dues low.
So is there a proximity to water? Do I recall something about being close to water that it doesn't matter if you're 30 years or not? Like if there's a water distance here, you got to go now.
So yes, again, one of the thresholds is inside of 3 miles from the coastline will be subjected to this and have that completion date by the end of 2024.
So regardless how old you are, if
correct,
you're within 3 miles of a coastline, does that include intercoastal, river, or just ocean?
Coastline, as defined by statute, which is going to be your beach line.
Beach line. Okay, I always think that's important because people associate water with water, but coastline is beach line.
Yep.
Okay, so let's kind of talk a little bit more about, all right, what are you seeing happening right now as a result of this bill? Like, what are you seeing condo associations that are having these studies done, and what's the impact to the association dues that you've seen or heard of thus far taking place?
So thus far, I think the biggest quandary we're going to find ourselves in is the timelines to complete these studies, and are there enough professionals to complete it? B, the cost of these studies and passing that cost on to the owners. And then C, again, our condo is going to become an unaffordable entity.
Right.
Based on, these new assessments and the result of these studies.
Yeah, and I think that's what jumped off the page to me immediately when you started talking about this was, we talk about, we already have an inventory constraint right now in Florida, thus adding an additional one if these become unaffordable and what do we mean by unaffordable is, I know I have some examples, but I'd love to hear because you're more in this. Talk about some examples of what HOA dues have done when these studies are completed. What have you seen happen or heard happen thus far?
Well, I'll start with even just, absent a, an ongoing assessment. Let's say it's a one-time special assessment for a project. A lot of these older complexes house the older demographic.
Yeah, fixed income.
Correct, that are living on fixed income, exactly. So, to throw a $20,000 assessment at a unit owner is going to create a financial crisis for that individual.
Because it's my understanding, they've got to pay that within a certain time frame.
Correct.
Like, it's not like, hey, listen, we're going to finance that over 30 years. Like, they expect it to be due within that year, maybe 18 months at best. And if they can't pay that, then they're going to put a special assessment lien on their property, aren't they? Is that how they're going to do it?
Right.
So now you've got someone with an additional $20,000 lien on the property, back due HOA dues that just keep compounding. Like, that poses some problems that go back that we'll talk about here in a minute that you started to see in 2008. But, that's borderline is when that predatory lending starts to step in, because if some of these fixed income people can't afford these properties, you might have someone step in and say, well, I'll buy you out from underneath that.
Sure.
And take over the property. And that's a whole nother thing. That's an unintended consequence, I think, of a bill like this being passed.
Yeah.
I think there'll probably be some revisions to prevent that from happening. But what are you seeing in monthly dues? Are some of these associations saying, not a one-time assessment, we're going to spread this out?
Yeah, I've heard stories of, a $600 a month assessment going to over $2,000.
That's over 3 times what the current assessment is in there. Yeah. Like, how is it possible someone could pivot their life for $1,800 difference, or excuse me, a 3 times multiplier? Like, how does someone even go about accepting something like that?
Right. That's the problem we're going to face.
Yeah. Yep. So, do you think there's a solution to this? Do you think there's something that our government's going to pass to kind of put some sort of, affordability clause in there for this?
I haven't heard of anything. I haven't read about anything. I haven't heard any whispers, quite honestly. I suspect, in my opinion, there will be some revisions to this bill. Mm-hmm. It was somewhat of a shotgun bill, maybe not completely thought through as far as the unintended consequences are concerned. So I really do suspect that there will be some amendments along the way.
There's got to be some unwinding of this.
Somewhat of a glitch bill. Yeah.
So let's break this down. If I'm a current seller, let's really dive into our real estate audience here. Let's say I'm a listing agent, I'm a buying agent, I'm a buyer, or I'm a seller. Let's start with the seller and the listing agent. What's their obligation now, if this study hasn't been done, to disclose to a buyer if they decide to sell the property?
Right. So the seller's obligation as of today is either hand over a summary of that inspection report, assuming it's been completed, or provide a statement, vis-a-vis the HOA or the condo association that the study has not been completed.
And so if that study hasn't been completed, is that almost like a buyer beware?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so if you're a buyer and you're a buyer's agent and you're stepping into this realm and that study hasn't been done and they provide, hey, it has not been completed, at that point, you've really got to say, hey, all bets are off. This thing could jump 3, 4, 5 times as much, or I could get a special assessment of $25,000 at any time or more.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't really know what I'm getting into. This is an unlimited windfall of expenses that I could incur.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and that's unfortunate because, like you said, there's a lot of them that haven't been completed because there's not enough specialty people to go around and do the inspection or do the study and then provide it, and then what's being done. And plus it takes time. So that bodes a potential issue. Now, you mentioned earlier that our forms in our contract here, being a NEFAR, the contracts have been updated with condo. Is that right? With the condo
stuff? Yeah, so our condo rider. And it's simply, it's not a major revision other than it requires delivery of these studies if they are available, or in lieu of the statement that they have not been completed.
You're referring to there.
Correct.
So where do you see kind of the rubber meeting the road on this from the standpoint of you've got sellers that are lined up there? I would imagine if I'm a seller, right, and I know this has got to be done. Well, first, let me back up. Do you think sellers even know this needs to be done?
The majority know.
Yeah, I think the majority of the public has no idea this needs to be done. But let's assume one day they wake up out of the ether and they realize this needs to be done, or someone brings it to their attention like, oh shit, like I got to get what? And they decide to sell. There's sellers that may just come out and say, man, I got to go. Let's get rid of this property now. We may see some inventory come to the market because these studies haven't been done and they know they got to happen. And then there's probably some buyers out here that have no idea this has got to be done that are going to be matchmaker on these properties.
That's right.
And then there's going to be some buyers that, where does the diligence lie? Like if you're a buyer's agent, are you somewhat like responsible for educating that buyer on this potentially could be an issue? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, 100%, Quentin. You've hit that on the nail as far as the education piece, and that's what we've been preaching to many of the local agents that we work with is educate. Perform your diligence, get as much information as you can Get copies of the board minutes from the last several meetings, because that's going to reveal any sort of whispers of assessments, or whether or not, whether or not these studies have been completed, or potential dates, if they have not been completed, when they will be completed. And then you can compile all that information, give it to your buyer, and then at that point, quite frankly, I think it is buyer beware.
Yeah, so you're telling me in the meeting notes, you'll find a little tea leaves in there about what's going on here. Is this inspection scheduled, or is a study being done? That it's going to be coming about, and it's up to that buyer to dive into those notes and read that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, dude, do you think a lot of buyers are reading that?
Absolutely not.
How many pages could meeting notes be, an annual budget? Like, what are we talking about? How many pages could this be?
I've seen from a few, but then I've seen up to 30, 40 pages.
And also, not only that, it's a freaking obstacle to get these things. I mean, I know from a lender's perspective, you got to go find the secret combination to get in there, pay an exuberant amount to get it, and then they send it to you. And I know the listing agent's obligated to get it and find it and give it to you and provide it. But once you get it, it's not easy to read and interpret.
That's right.
So, I think that, is there any type of liability to a buyer's agent besides saying, this is what we know, here's the documents, you need to read them?
Yeah, no, outside of that, I think that's what, again, we've been preaching is just do what you can. And at some point, it does become a business decision for that buyer.
Now, from a listing standpoint, if there's tea leaves in those HOA notes that you're referring to, is it their job to disclose that, or their job to say, here it is, read it?
I think it's a conveyor of information. Man, this is a slippery slope, man. If I'm a buyer, man, that's a scary situation to be in. It'll be interesting.
So I think that applies thus further price pressure on our market for the single families versus condos, because, now you did hint on something, and for our audience, I want them to understand this. It's 3 and above. So if it's below 3, they're not required to do this special assessment reserve study, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Now, does that start, when you said it starts at the 3rd level, I want to make sure I understand this because I'm looking for clarity. Let's say I got an 8 unit, right? And I'm wanting to buy unit 2. Is unit 2 subject for an assessment as units 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8?
That's correct. Yes.
So 2 gets it as well.
Correct.
Okay, so it's the whole tower in that case.
It's the whole tower in that case. Okay. Where you run into a little bit of unclarity is, what is designated as a story. So, for example, let's say you've got parking garages, floor 1 and 2.
Okay.
You've got a mixed use where it's commercial for 10 floors. Condominiums don't start until floor 11. That's where the conundrum comes in, and the bill is not 100% clear as to what it applies to.
Imagine that.
It'll be interesting. You get into what if level 1 is underground?
Okay.
But my opinion, I think kind of looking back at the initial objective of this bill is safety. So, you're looking at the structural integrity of a building.
I agree.
So
the way I would interpret
regardless of its use.
Yep. Once you're off the ground 3 feet and above, or 3 floors and above, that's where
that's right.
That's where that structural integrity comes from, because the whole bill seems to be designed around the non-integrity part of the Miami Surfside.
That's right.
What was going on down there, that was an issue, right? Neglected for quite some time, well documented too.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what they want to do, is prevent the neglected, structural integrity of properties. But I think so if we're dealing with condos that are now, and I know I'm asking the same question again, but if it goes 1, 2, 3, if we have it's 1, 2, and 3, is that now subject to this?
That's subject. So it's 3 and above. So anything 1 or 2, and again, it has to be declared as a condominium.
Right. So that means,
or a co-op.
Now
so
that means
a townhome.
State, like this tax bill has to declare it as that? Is that
correct? There's a filed declaration of condominium.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how about this? What if it's a 1 and a 2 and it's right on the water, oceanside?
Exempt.
Really?
Really.
Now, how does that make any sense whatsoever that it's exempt? And it could be elevated up, right? Because that first floor is like piers and post, right? And elevated up, and technically be the same height as a 3-story condominium. But that first floor is just elevation, and then there's 1, and then there's 2. How does that work?
That's right. It's going with the statutory definition of a story. So absolutely. That's interesting.
That is interesting. So that blows my mind, because we've got a slew of condos that are 2 stories right on the water,
on pilings.
Yeah, and just exactly on pylons, and it's like, well, they're exempt. They don't need it, and they probably need it more than some of those 8 stories.
That's right.
That they're referring to out there.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. So, is there anything else in this bill that I'm missing that you want to discuss or recommend to our audience that I'm leaving out here? Because I know that you are the expert in this category, and I know I'm not, and I'm just asking the questions that I know.
Yeah, I think to reiterate some of the quandaries, I mean, it's just the bill is very vague, in my opinion, so far as some definitions. So that's what I alluded to earlier. I suspect there'll be some sort of a glitch bill just to amend these glitches per se and better define some of what exactly is a story, for example. And I just, quite frankly, I am, some of the unintended consequences. You look into the scenario where Surfside, for example, one tower had all of this this maintenance obligation after the collapse, or let's say a tower sustains hurricane damage, but only one of the two towers.
Right.
They're gonna, the owners in Tower 1 that was destroyed or affected, may have $200,000 in repairs, yet their value is the same as a Tower 2 condo.
Right.
Yet they've put all that money into it, so it doesn't really offset one another.
In that particular case, if you have multiple towers and one is damaged, do the other towers take on the same assessment as one to help offset the cost, or does it specifically just go to that one, or does that matter how the condo?
It's typically how the bylaws are set up for the condo, but traditionally it's going to spread across all the owners. But you still talk about deductibles, you talk about non-covered items. To where Tower 1 that was affected is going to have more of an expense than Tower 2.
And I think it's real important for the audience to understand. We just had Ryan Locke on here talking about homeowners insurance and the homeowners insurance conundrum that's going on in the state of Florida. It is a different style of homeowners insurance for a condo than it is for a single family residence. That's why you have condo association, because they absorb a lot of that insurance.
Sure.
It's a lot different than homeowners insurance that you would have on your home. So you actually have two different parties that are insuring this condo, the association, and the homeowner's insurance is insurance the dwelling and the contents inside of the four walls. So it's a lot different when you say homeowners and when you say insurance. For our audience, he's not referring to like what Ryan Locke would do for you or an insurance person would do for the condo. That's a different style of insurance compared to what we think traditional homeowners insurance is.
That's right.
So that's another conundrum that I think is an issue there, and I think it's something that when you're buying a condo, you should be aware of. Yeah.
And I think one other thing I'd point out would be the, a mixed use, not only mixed use, but mixed level complex or neighborhood. For example, you've got some 1- and 2-story flats under the same association as a 30, floor tower.
Wow.
So in that instance, is that assessment going to apply to all of the units in a traditional sense? In my opinion, I'm thinking there will be an establishment of a master association, let's say, for your everyday common grounds maintenance, and then there'll be a sub specific to the tower.
That makes sense
to address these Senate bill issues.
Where do you see this impact really hitting the state more? Probably South Florida.
South Florida. I mean, I would say I've seen Daytona South.
Yeah, I know Daytona's really, really fighting a lot of this because a lot of these studies have already been done in the Daytona area, and we're starting to see some of those HOAs roll in.
Correct.
And they're definitely pricey.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's going on there.
Absolutely.
In Northeast Florida, we don't really have a lot of condos that really, fall in this category on the water, if you may. We have a select few, but we do have quite a few that are that 30 years approaching that.
But like you said, here, on the local level of Jacksonville Beach, Neptune Beach, Atlantic Beach, most of the condos are newer buildings.
So where I see this really hitting, Miami, Panama City, let's see here, Daytona.
Volusia County.
Volusia, Destin, Fort Walton Beach, Tampa, St. Pete area. Definitely in that area. So there are big parts, major metros in this area. Orlando, not as much, especially since they don't have a coastline there.
Right.
They might have some over 30, but if you're in an Orlando market, really probably not near as big a deal as it is the previous markets we just named there. So, but again, if you're a buyer and you're looking to buy, here's our recommendation to you and a buyer's agent. You need to get those notes if the assessment hasn't been done. And you need to read the notes more importantly. And inside those notes, what are they looking for, Justin?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely read what you're provided, and specifically you're looking for, just whether or not that study's been done.
Okay.
If it has been done, what sort of issues have been noted, and on the reserve side, you can easily get a copy of the budget, that's the approved budget at least for that current year.
Yep.
And you can look at the reserves. And most often, a good budget is going to show a shelf life for each of the major elements of that condo too. So, a lot of times you can easily deduce, if there's 2 years left on the roof, you're going to have an assessment coming up.
Yeah, and it'll tell you that. And also, it'll show you next year's proposed budget, too. Yeah. It's usually a current and proposed and previous.
Absolutely.
So you should have a good guidance going into the next year so there's no surprises there.
Yeah.
But again, if that study hasn't been done, inside those notes, they're looking for conversations about...
There should be some whispers of certain items that, have been talked about or have been noted as issues, flagged as issues. So, yeah, at least at that point, the buyer says, hey, I'm taking a 50-50 chance on this.
Would you recommend if the buyer's taking a 50-50 chance, maybe negotiate something with the seller to share in that risk? Or would you negotiate, say, hey, listen, you and I both know this reserve study hasn't been done yet. It's going to be coming due. I can see on the budget here, you got a shelf life of 3 years on the roof left. Like, I know I'm going to be absorbing some of that. Are you looking for a price negotiation or a concession of some sort? Is that unreasonable to ask that?
No, not at all.
Yeah, I think if I'm a buyer and I'm going into a market where I know I'm going 50-50 on the risk, I'm going to ask that seller to share in 50% of that risk with me in order just to make sure that I'm not 100% taking on all the risk.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a fair position to take. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, Justin, I tell you what, I really appreciate you being on the show today, sharing this information. Where can people find out more about you and Blue Ocean Title?
Yeah. So, we've got an incredible website, great marketing folks. So, jump on the website. We're on all the platforms so far as social media is concerned. And just, here in the local market, we've got a pretty good presence and are very accessible. So you'll see us around town doing a lot of events or educational pieces. So, yeah. Yeah,
I tell you what, I'm very impressed with what you guys are doing out there. You're actually all over the place. You got a number of offices, great staff, great team, 3 attorneys on hand that are very educated and experts in the field, and just appreciate you being on the show today. Guys, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe on YouTube, leave some notes for us there, leave some comments. If you like this episode, share it, 5-star review it, leave a review, share it with someone from Apple or on Spotify or on Amazon or Google Podcasts. Justin, thanks again for being on the show today. This is fantastic. Guys, again, leave us some comments. We'll keep coming back with stuff like this as you requested.
Great. Thanks for having me, Quentin.
Yeah, brother. Thanks for being on here.
I got one more shot, I'm gonna make it. One more chance, I'm gonna take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got one life to live, so I put my all into it, yeah.